Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer specializing in System Center Technologies. Today's discussion will be part 12 of an ongoing series talking about Operating System Deployment and Configuration Manager 2012. For today's discussion, want to turn our attention to talking about the ADK specifically and the tools inside the ADK that OSD leverages for doing the kinds of things that it does. If you've ever installed ConfigMgr 2012, you know that one of the prerequisites is to download and install the ADK prior to being able to install ConfigMgr. The reason for that is because in OSD, if you use that feature of ConfigMgr, we leverage tools from the ADK. If you look at the install of the ADK to satisfy the ConfigMgr prerequisites, you'll realize that not all of the ADK is installed, only specific pieces, right? So the ADK is bigger than just what we install for OSD, and we'll talk about some of those, right? In terms of the ADK also, we've talked about before in this series that really OSD doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything special, except it's a nice wrapper for some of the commands that you could do manually in the ADK, right? Certainly it does some more things, and it has ConfigMgr infrastructure to be able to leverage, and the distribution points and the throttling and all of that. But there are certain commands in the task sequence: image deployment, driver acquisition and deployment, software updates, disk partitioning, all that really come from the ADK. And we'll look at that, and that's why I want to look at it, because it's interesting, right? So this is the agenda. Want to talk through these things. What is the ADK? Why discuss the ADK? All roads kind of lead to the ADK, right? Components of the ADK, and so on, right? So let's start. So what is really the ADK? Well, already mentioned it. The ADK really is a set of tools that was designed to help administrators be able to mass deploy Windows in a very customized fashion, right? Certainly it's needed for OSD and MDT, as you see the last bullet point. It does not require those to work. OSD and MDT leverage the tools in the ADK in order to work, right? Every time a new operating system is released, the ADK is updated. Might even be renamed. It used to be that the ADK was named the Wake, Windows Automated Installation Kit. Now it's the ADK, right? If you had the original release of ConfigMgr 2012, it leveraged the Wake. Subsequent releases now leverage the ADK. So the ADK typically supports N-2 operating systems. So as of this recording, we have Windows 8.1, the latest ADK anyway, Windows 8.1, Windows 8, and Windows 7. There's the equivalent on the server side too, right? So that's interesting to know, because depending on the operating systems you need to support, it could be that you need to consider tools from the previous ADK and different things, right? We won't get into that here, but at least understand. So the ADK, very powerful tool set for doing imaging. It is largely command line driven. In some cases, that's kind of a nervous thing or unfamiliar territory for some folks. If it's not GUI based, command line is certainly a bit more typing intensive, but it's not that hard either. And you'll see some of that as we go along. Why discuss the ADK? ConfigMgr admins have enough that they need to know. Do you really need to know the ADK? You don't really need to know it, right? Well, can you do the job of OSD and not know the ADK? Yes, you can. But if you really want to understand OSD, then understand several of the ADK components drive imaging. Knowing the ADK is going to help you along the way better learn the internal processes of imaging, at least as they're driven by OSD. MDT can be useful certainly for troubleshooting if there's something that isn't going exactly right and you know what piece of the puzzle is being leveraged. It's going to help you along the way to figuring that out, right? We'll mention it in a minute, the ADK kind of talks about some additional logs that are available in Windows that you can leverage to further pull the covers back on imaging. Typically when we think about troubleshooting in OSD, we think about the SMSTS log, and that's certainly a valid thing to pull out because that's where a lot of our detail is kept. But that's not the only log that's of interest for imaging. And we can, we'll talk about, I'll show you at least the other logs, some of them that can be used. Right. Knowing the ADK is going to allow for additional flexibility during imaging. I have said it before. The task sequence provides you some steps that are conveniences. There is no requirement that you use our steps. If you want to build your own custom step for formatting and partitioning, that's fine. Go do it. There are reasons to do it in some cases, right, to give you more flexibility. If you want to build your own steps for USMT, that's fine. Go do it. Very reasonable in some circumstances. But if you don't understand the underlying tool set, it's harder to do, right? All right. Also, knowing the ADK is going to raise your awareness of the additional tools capabilities beyond those leveraged by OSD. Right? There are other tools there that can be valuable in other situations. So all roads lead to the ADK. That's not really a slide on its own, but it kind of points here that the OSD does use the ADK extensively for what it does. Without the ADK, we could not do imaging. Well, we could do imaging, but probably not in the form it is today. We would have to write our own tool set to do it. So these are the components that OSD leverages for imaging. So certainly Windows PE. Windows PE, we have seen, is the entry point for imaging. Windows PE is provided by the ADK. The Windows PE in the ADK looks different than what you will see in ConfigMgr, mainly because, or totally because, ConfigMgr wraps or adds some things to it that gives you kind of a different looking wrapper, but it's the same PE. DISM. So DISM you'll see me use extensively in some demos coming up. That is the piece used for image deployment in ConfigMgr 2012. There's another tool that has been used previously, ImageX. You can still use that if you want for image deployment, but DISM is the new tool, image deployment. DISM's for driver injection, DISM for software updates, DISM for registry addition, software, packaging, and so on, right? USMT for user state manipulation is part of the ADK. This one I put off to the side, Windows Image File Boot. I put an asterisk by it. It is not something, Windows Image Boot is not something we support as of, at least right now in this recording, in ConfigMgr, though there's a good amount of documentation about how you would use Windows Image File Boot in MDT. So if you can leverage it in MDT, it's not out of the realm of conceptual possibility that you could do it in OSD. Right, so it's out there with an asterisk. That comes from the ADK. There are other tools that we leverage, certainly from the ADK. The OSCD IMG, you'll see me create a CD in a minute, an ISO. Certainly whenever we create our ISO images and different things, CD images, whatever, we leverage this tool for helping with that. BCD boot to set up the boot partitions and so on, DISM API, WimGAPI, other tools that are in there, right? These are pivotal to ConfigMgr. Other things that are in the ADK, not necessarily tied to ConfigMgr, Windows System Image Manager. Now this one I would put an asterisk by as well. I didn't, I should have, because this is a tool, while not required directly by imaging, sometimes is used to aid in imaging because this is the tool that generates unattend files. Well, why would you want an unattend file? What is an unattend file? Unattend file is something that specifies work to do essentially during Windows setup. And you can leverage it for just that, right? If you have had a situation where customer task sequence was really getting large and needed to trim it down, so we needed to offload some of the things in that task sequence to an unattend file to help us do that. That's an option too. There's other reasons, right? Other tools inside ADK, just to mention, the Application Compatibility Toolkit to help you whenever you're exploring whether your applications are compatible with the new version of Windows. Other volume activation, management tools, some performance tools, assessment tools, and so on, right? So I won't go into those. Just know there are a number of things in the ADK beyond those that we install with OSD. Now, mentioned on the previous slide that ADK provides detail about some of the logging that can be used to further troubleshoot the imaging process. Now, ADK doesn't provide these logs. They're written by the system, the Windows system. But these are some of them. So beyond the SMSTS log, we have the setup ACT log, the setup error log, the CBS log. All of these process the drivers that are installing and the packages that are installing and different things, maybe software updates or whatever else is in there, right? The unattended processing is recorded here. So a wealth of information that can be very pivotal to understanding issues during the setup phase and so on of an image. All right. So that said, let's walk through some of these things and show how they work, right? So I want to walk through and show how you would image with or create Windows PE. Then I want to do an image deployment. Then I want to show some image maintenance and so on that we're going to do specifically with the ADK. So let me pull in the lab. So in order to get the job of imaging done, we have to create Windows PE. It really isn't that hard to create Windows PE in the latest version of the ADK or recent versions of the ADK. The thing I'm going to do, though, to make it work easily is launch the deployment and imaging toolset version of a command prompt. I'm going to make sure I run that as administrator. Wow, there we go. All right. And it's going to add some environment details and things that will be useful to you while you're manipulating things inside the ADK. It certainly gives you a default path. But what we're going to do is go and use some of the tools created or provided to build PE. If you've built PE in some of the earlier versions of the toolkit of the ADK, Wake at that time, it wasn't the easiest process. Now it's a lot easier. So let me go back here. Oh, sorry. There we go. So I'm just going to navigate to the full path. It's under the x86, Windows kits. Well, can't talk and type at the same time. Windows kits, 8.1, assessment and deployment, Windows PE. And we have two tools that we want to use. Copy PE, then make WinPE media, right? So the first thing I need to do is copy PE. If I want to see the structure for it, just run copy PE. It will show you. So what I need to do is tell it what version I want to use or architecture. I'm going to use AMD 64 and where I want to put it. And I'm going to call this A because I have a couple of these folders from when I was working with this earlier. This folder is not created, but it will create it and adds the stuff in, and then it changes directory to it when we're done. Right? Well, I don't want to be in this directory because I need to run the process to make Windows PE. So I'm going to go back to Program Files and go back to Windows Kits, 8.1, Assessment and Deployment, Windows PE, and now I'm back. So I want to run the process make WinPE, but again, I need certain command line options, so I'm going to run it to create an ISO, and I'm going to tell it it's in PE AMD 64A. I need a backslash. And I'm going to, that's my source directory, and my destination will be the same, but this time I want to create just the ISO. I'm going to tell it what ISO to create, what the name is. Okay, so now it's creating the ISO, and as easy as that, I have an ISO file that I could then burn to a DVD, burn to a CD, whatever. You see the ones from my previous work. There it is, right? So I've got this ISO already mounted onto this VM from a previous build. So you'll see that it's on my desktop already, right? So I can go ahead and launch this VM and boot from the ISO, and I will load up Windows PE. So we'll give it a second to load. And then what I want to do is use Windows PE to deploy a WIM. Very much exactly like ConfigMgr does it. It just has a different look and feel to it because this is the standard PE, not the ConfigMgr customized. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is connect to my network location where I know I have the WIM. And I'm going to go ahead and, just for typing convenience, and connect all the way down to Windows 8 image. Typing that exactly backwards. Come on. There. All right, so now we're connected to the Z drive. All right, so I'm going to do a directory here just to make sure I remember the names. And well, first of all, before I do anything, before I deploy my image, I need to partition and format the disk, right? That's something that maybe you don't even much think about because you configure it in the UI, let it do its thing, and off we go, right? But there's work that happens behind the scenes, a nifty little tool called DiskPart that we will use here. Go back to X, right? That helps me format and partition the disk. So I'm treating this as bare metal, so I want to get rid of anything that was on the disk. So I'm going to select disk 0, because there's only one disk here. And then I want to clean it. That's going to get rid of anything that was there. And then I want to create a few partitions. I need to probably not talk while I type so I don't make too many typos. I'm going to give it a size of 3000 and an ID of 27. Now that I created it, I'm going to format it. Yeah. Okay, so I'm formatting it, and once I get done, I'm going to assign letter equals. So assign the drive letter. All right, now I'm going to create a couple more volumes. This has the nice up arrow feature, so I can go back and do that. I'm going to give it the size of the next partition, the size of 300. Then I'm going to format that partition again. But this time I'm going to give it the label of system. All right. And then I'm going to assign it a drive letter of S. And then finally, I'm going to mark this particular partition as active. And then finally, I'm going to go back and create a third partition, which gives it, I don't specify size, so it gives it the rest of the disk. And then I'm going to go through and format that one and call it Windows. And then finally make it assign the drive letter C. Good enough. So with that done, I'm finished with DiskPart. All right, now I can go and apply my image from there. So to do that, I'm still at the same place. I'm just going to use, I need to go back to my Z drive just so I know what everything's typed, just to make sure. And now I'm going to apply my image using DISM. So DISM is one of those tools I mentioned a second ago. It is used to apply the image. You could also use ImageX, but this is the newer one. And I'm going to use it. So I am simply going to use the switch apply image, tell it where it is, and I know this one's called in Windows 8 captured. And then I'm going to have to tell it inside the WIM we might have a couple of different images, so I'm going to have to tell it which image to apply by using the index. You could do this a couple of different ways. I'm going to use the /index. I'm going to tell it where to apply. And off it goes. Now it'll take a second. You'll see it start to load up. I'll pause the video after it starts to load just for sake of time. So here it goes, loading 1%. I'll come back whenever it gets closer to completion and continue the video. All right, so we're getting close to having the image fully applied. I went ahead and started again from this point because once we hit the late 80%, the 90%, it should wrap up very, very quickly. So we'll just give it another couple of seconds, let it tick through the remaining percentage of loading it, and then we'll continue. All right, it should zip right on through here very quickly. There we go. All right. So now that we've got that loaded, right, if we look at the disk, then we should see, in fact, that it's been expanded. And there it is, right? So complete tangent here. But whenever I show you this, you can see that what we did is we took the WIM, we took the contents of the WIM, we unpacked those contents to the drive on the machine. That's what we do, certainly during imaging, so that we have the OS laid down, we can boot and go on. But that's also the process we use whenever we are going through pre-stage deployment. And I just want to point that out because pre-stage deployment is kind of a two-step process. The first process is actually to create a WIM that contains the image you want to deploy and some additional details that will help ConfigMgr know that the data is already on the disk. So basically, you'll take this WIM that you create that's pre-staged, that has the OS, it has other software in it that you select during the wizard, use a task sequence to very basic task sequence, can be as small as 3 steps, to basically apply that WIM as a data file and then turn the machine off. Then when you turn the machine back on and choose the task sequence that relates to that WIM, it's going to go through and recognize that the files are already there, the disk has already been expanded, most of the source files probably or could be there for the software you want to install, and the process is much faster, right? We'll end the tangent there, right? Because pre-stage is a topic unto itself. But it's loaded. So now all we have to do is make sure that the disk is configured to boot correctly. So I'm going to go ahead into my C drive now that I'm there, now that it's loaded, into System32 and run a utility to quickly do that. BCD boot, and I'm going to tell it the Windows is the root directory for the system, and I want to use English US as the language. It will do that and copy the source files. So if I go ahead and turn the machine off, start it, and allow it to boot, this time not from the CD, but directly from the drive that we just imaged, you'll see that it kicks off and starts, right? So it's going to go through. If you watch this long enough, you'll see it go through and specialize the devices, go back and reboot again, and then come up to a licensing screen, which I won't sit here and wait for. In fact, I'll just go ahead and turn this off because you see that it is in fact booting. But that is the process of deploying an image, creating PE and so on, simply by using the ADK tools. All right, now I'm going to go through the process now of showing how you can specialize an image. Right, once you have a WIM, or manage an image, I should say. Once you have the WIM created, there will be things that you might want to do to it offline. You might not want to have to load it all the way back up and add the contents to it. Maybe you want to do that without going to a lot of effort, and certainly the tools that are in the ADK help you with that, right? So in this case, I already have the WIM. It's the WIM I just deployed. I have it stored on my server, so I'm going to just go ahead and use that WIM to make some tweaks, just to show you how you can make some tweaks. So let me go into a command prompt here. Here I'm not going to use the deployment command prompt, just a standard one, but I am going to run as administrator. All right, and the first thing I want to do is check net use. I don't recall. No, well, if I type it right. Okay, so I've got the Z drive still mapped. So I'm going to use that because it points to the location. This is another server, just standard ConfigMgr server, but not the one that I have the data stored on. I'm just going to use this to build. So I'm first going to show you how you can get the information about the WIM. So you noticed in the first time I did it that I used an index. You don't have to use an index. You can use a name as well. But either way, you have to use something that identifies which particular image inside the WIM that you want to manipulate. Easy enough to figure that out. You just use dism get wiminfo, and then tell it what wim file you want to use. In this case, I'm going to use my z colon, because that's what I map to. All right, and we'll get information about it. So you'll see that there's actually two indexes. This one is the BitLocker partition. This one is the actual OS, so that's why I specified index 2 whenever I loaded it. Right, you could just as easily refer to it by name, but index is shorter to type. Index with the number is shorter to type than name with the full name. So I'll just use that. So what I want to do is take this wim and mount it to a directory where I can work with it, right? Okay, hopefully I typed all that right. I'll see in a minute. I'm going to call it index 2. The mount directory is going to be, and I must have made a mistake. Let's see, mount wim file, z package source, Windows 8 image, Windows 8 captured, index 2. Let's see, I thought I had that directory in existence. Let's see if I do. Wim, that would help. To type it correctly, right? So I need to, I called it wim mount, should be wim mount. Good enough. So that's going to take a second to load. It's very much the same process as kind of laying the contents down like you saw during imaging. In fact, you see the wim being unpacked right now. You'll see it jump ahead, add a few more files here once we start to get the progress bar. So like before, there come the files. So like before, I'll go ahead and pause this and come back in when we're close to having it expanded. All right, and so very close to being done now, and we should have it finished very shortly, and then we'll show a couple of other things. What I want to run through once we get it mounted is just demonstrating how we can use DISM to inject some drivers, do a software update installation, although I will tell you the software update installation demo won't actually work because the file that I included isn't really valid for this particular system, but nevertheless you'll see how you can do it. And then also I want to do a registry addition, which is interesting. So now that we're done, come on. All right, good. So now that we're done and it's mounted, right, you can see it mounted below. What I'm going to do is use DISM to add a driver. So I'm going to use a command line to do that. So let's see, DISM slash, let's see, DISM, sorry. Yeah, sorry, got lost on my other documentation here. DISM slash mount wim. I'm sorry. Image, that's what I want. And I'm going to use the add driver switch and tell it where the drivers are. If I can type right. All right, and I could either do an individual driver, or I could do what often you will probably do, adding drivers to ConfigMgr, and just point it to a top-level folder and have it recurse through. So I'll let this start. You'll see there's something like 65 drivers that it could load. I'll short-circuit it between. What did I do? Oh, what did I do? What did I do? Oh, I know what I did. It shouldn't be driver. It's driver, and let it recurse through and short circuit it before it gets done, because I don't want to wait for it to try to run through all 65, but it will at least get started, and it will go through and inject all of them. Then Windows Setup would handle it whenever it booted up, right? So I'll go ahead and stop it there. Now, another thing I could do is use DISM to add a package. So a package in this case being a software update. Now, I mentioned that the software update is one that I know won't work here, but at least you'll get to see the idea. All right, and then tell it where the package is. All right, same kind of deal. It'll quickly let you know, hey, didn't find anything. And then a third thing that we can easily do, now that the image is mounted, is we can manipulate the registry, which is kind of cool. So let me show you that. I'll do a reg load, and I'll tell it that I want to load a particular hive into a registry key called test, right? And then I'll point to the hive. So wim mount is where a wim is loaded, and then it's just a file directory shuffle from there. And I'm going to load the software hive. Okay, system specify key. So wim mount Windows system 32. That's what I meant to do. All right, and it still didn't find it. Config. That typing keeps biting me here. Config. There we go. And if I load regedit, now you see that I've expanded to local machine. Here's test, and I in fact have that registry live, open for editing, so on. Right, so I could make a change here. Once I'm done, I would simply say reg unload. HQ local machine test. Reg unload. HQLN test, that should be right. What did I do wrong? Make sure I update that. Not sure what happened. Reg, unload. Oh, you know what? Okay, hang on a minute. Let me pause the video. I think I didn't launch as administrator this time when I launched the command prompt. One moment. Nope, what I had done is I just fat-fingered it somewhere. I didn't see it at first, but apparently I did because I just did it again and it was good. So I unloaded that. Sorry about that. And then I just refresh and test is gone. So good enough. Now, I've got, with all of that, I've got all the changes that I might have made saved here. And so what I need to do is preserve those changes, the changes of drivers or software updates or software or registry or whatever. So the way I do that is I need to unmount the wim. So I'm going to use unmount wim, mount dir. And if I want to keep the changes, I just tell it commit. In my case, I don't, so I just tell it discard. And it goes through and it discards the changes. Now you'll see it start to close itself up here. Yeah, the files are going away. So we're good. So I'll go ahead and take this out of the picture, and I want to go into my lab and do one more thing. All right. So this is my other machine where I have already loaded System Image Manager. Right? It's very easy from this path. It's just the WSIM folder and Image Manager. So Image Manager is essentially a tool that you can use to create an unattended file. So we talked about a little bit what an unattended file is. If you've never seen one and you look at it for the first time in XML, it can be a bit daunting, especially if you don't know how to read XML or haven't done that in the past. So in Windows System Image Manager, I'm going to need a distribution share. In my case, I've already got one created. If not, you could create one. This is where the changes and such that I would make to my answer file will be stored. Then I'll need to open up an image. So I just opened up the install.wim for Windows 8 Enterprise, and these are the various components that I have. Now, you could go through these, figure out where it makes sense to load various things, right? So I could go ahead and this is going to tell you certain passes it makes sense to load these things, certain passes it doesn't. So I could add to multiple choices here, and it all reflects on this side, right? And then once I'm done, I can save the answer file, no big deal, and call it. I'm just going to put it for convenience on the desktop. All right, and then that, even though it's called untitled, is my XML. Now it's not going to be real pretty probably here to look at, but that's it, right? So very quick whirlwind tour. Definitely, this is something that you will want to spend time with if you want to use it. This is definitely not a tutorial on how to use it. That's a discussion unto itself, but it is a useful tool. The one place where I use this a lot, and recently, in fact, is whenever I was working with Windows Embedded. There's an unattend setup file that you can build there that looks very similar to this in terms of how to set it up, right? So, all right. That said, that's what I wanted to walk through with the ADK. ADK is core to OSD. If you haven't worked with it, you haven't seen it, you don't know how to use it, definitely worth your time. So we'll end the session here, and we will catch you in the next part.